Welcome to the LifeCast, valuing life and transforming lives. Find out more at elifenetwork.com. Here now is your host, Rich Bennett.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of the LifeCast. Thanks for being with us. Coming up in our second segment, I'll be joined by Life Network's nurse manager, Barbra Roldan. But first, it's time for 3 life-affirming things you should know. Our weekly look at what's happening nationally, here in Colorado, and then a story of pro-life impact. And we begin this week with a deeply concerning development, one that reflects a growing trend across the country and hits close to home here in Colorado. Recently, the state of Delaware moved one step closer to becoming the 11th U.S. jurisdiction to legalize physician-assisted suicide. The state Senate there in Delaware passed a bill allowing terminally ill adults with 6 months or less to live to request and self-administer life-ending drugs. The House approved it back in March, and now it awaits Democratic Governor Matt Meyer, who has indicated that he plans to sign it. In fact, Meyer campaigned on support for assisted suicide in 2024, following a prior veto by his predecessor. And under this bill, residents deemed, quote, terminal, often a subjective label, can obtain a prescription for life-ending drugs and take them without any mental health evaluations or safeguards against subtle pressure. Now, here in Colorado, physician-assisted suicide, sometimes called medical aid in dying, has been legal since voters passed Proposition 106 back in 2016. And since that time, over 1,000 patients have been prescribed these medications, mostly for cancer and neurological diseases. But no matter how compassionately packaged, these laws send a troubling message that some lives are no longer worth living. And as Christians, we know that there's a better way, and the answer to suffering is not death, but compassion, presence, and hope. Let's be people who live differently, who stand in the gap, and who remind our communities that every life matters, even in its final days. Next, we turn our attention to a heartbreaking and urgent story out of Fort Collins, Colorado, one that underscores both the humanity of the unborn and the risks that abortion poses, not just to babies, but to their mothers as well. On February 6th, 18-year-old Lexi Aguilera tragically lost her life following a second trimester abortion at Planned Parenthood in Fort Collins. Lexi was just weeks into living on her own and had gone into Planned Parenthood after learning she was 22 weeks pregnant. She suffered a rare but catastrophic complication called amniotic fluid embolism, a life-threatening emergency that can arise during later-stage abortions as well as childbirth. But here's where the tragedy deepens. According to testimony shared at a recent Colorado legislative hearing, Planned Parenthood delayed getting Lexi the urgent care she needed. Lexi's grandfather recounted watching doctors at the hospital desperately fight to save her life. After multiple doses of epinephrine and 7 liters of blood, it was too late. And he called what happened the, quote, silent siren treatment, which is a tactic where abortion facilities call 911 but request no lights, no sirens, or anything to avoid drawing public attention. And this silent siren approach, reportedly used to shield clinics from pro-life witnesses and media, can critically delay life-saving care. So I want you to let that sink in. This young woman and her child both died that day, a double tragedy that raises hard questions not only about the safety of these procedures, but also the glaring lack of accountability at abortion clinics. In response, the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies, or DORA, has now opened an official investigation into Lexi's death, a rare but necessary step. Now, it's worth noting that this heartbreaking loss of life came just weeks after a bill in the Colorado House, House Bill 1252, which was sponsored by Representative Scott Bottoms, aimed to bring second and third trimester abortion clinics under the same health department regulations as other surgical centers. That bill, as we previously reported here on the LifeCast, failed in committee. Colorado allows abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. But unlike birthing centers or ambulatory surgical clinics, abortion facilities here are not subject to health department licensing or inspections. What this means is there's no routine oversight, even as the risks to mothers skyrocket later in pregnancy. And as Dr. Catherine Wheeler, a friend here of the LifeCast, testified, 1 in 10 second trimester abortions results in complications, with nearly 2% being life-threatening. Now, Lexi's story is a stark reminder that abortion is never just about the baby. It's also about women and about men. And when oversight is stripped away in the name of protecting access at all costs, it's moms like Lexi who pay the ultimate price. As this investigation by Dora moves forward, let's pray for Lexi's family and for true accountability. And let's redouble our efforts to advocate for life, because every life matters. Mother, father, and child. After that sobering tragedy, let's end with this week's story of hope. And with Mother's Day just behind us, I want to celebrate a young mom that we met at Life Network, who I'll call Mia. Just 3 months into dating her boyfriend, Mia discovered she was pregnant. Shocked and scared, she came to Life Network to confirm her pregnancy. And she told our team this: if my pregnancy test is positive, I'm going to get an abortion. My boyfriend says he's supportive of whatever I choose. But that day, something powerful happened. One of our patient advocates sat with Mia and shared her own story, talking honestly about abortion, adoption, and the realities of being a single parent. It was a heartfelt conversation, one that opened up space for Mia to reflect. And after, Mia shared that her own mom was encouraging her to keep the baby. With that added support and new confidence, Mia made the courageous decision to choose life for her baby boy. In June 2024, little Oliver was born, a beautiful baby boy who changed everything. And this Mother's Day was Mia's very first as a mom, with her precious son in her arms outside the womb. Isn't that beautiful? Coming up next, I'll be joined by Life Network's nurse manager, Barbra Roldan. Stay with us. You're listening to the LifeCast. Welcome back to the LifeCast, where every week we share real stories and important conversations that affirm life, inspire hope, and celebrate the work of pregnancy centers like ours. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Life Network's nurse manager, Barbra Roldan. Barbra joined Life Network as nurse manager in 2024 and brings over 25 years of medical experience. She served both in the United States and North Africa with a focus on high-risk maternity care. As an RN and nurse practitioner, she leads our nursing team across 4 pregnancy centers. And Barbra and her husband, Phil, have been married 13 years and enjoy adventuring with their 2 energetic boys, whether traveling, hiking, or camping. Barbra, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me today.
So, as I shared in the intro, you have been in the medical field for over 25 years. Tell us a little bit about how God led you to join Life Network as our nurse manager.
I always feel like where I'm at is where God has led me to that moment. So everything that came prior to this was always his journey for me to get to where I am now. And the last 13 years before I came to Life Network was very focused on high risk maternity. I got to be a telehealth nurse and help really underserved women find resources, find help, get health education for high risk pregnancies. And on top of that, I started with a team of 14 that expanded to a team of 64 nurses that were under my direction. And so in leadership, I got to grow, in medical education experience, I got to grow. And having had all that experience up till right that now in this point in time, I feel like that has served me so well to be prepared. And I'm just passionate for those who are underserved. I'm passionate for those who are in crisis. I'm passionate to help those who need hope spoken into their life. And as a missionary working in North Africa, my hope was to share hope of Jesus with people. It was a really hard circumstance. And even that experience of wanting to share how Jesus transforms people's life in a real practical way, and then combining that with how does that work with pregnancy and all the challenges that come with pregnancy and with underserved women in a pregnancy situation. Like all those three just collided and crashed together to the point where all of my background that I've had up till this point, it feels like it's collided for a purpose and a calling right now in this point in time.
As you think back about, how God stirred in you a personal pro-life passion, what would you say your personal pro-life story is?
My pro-life story is very personal. When I was quite young, my mom shared with me when I was about 12 years old, very impressionable. And she shared her circumstance with her and my dad, who had had an abortion prior to me being born. They weren't married yet. There was a lot of pressure at that time where unwed mothers, unwed parents, they just don't do these things. And having a child in that situation, there was so much social pressure. My mom was going to be kicked out of her own home. There was a lot of difficulty in the relationship between my mom and her parents. And my mom shared that story with me so that I wouldn't repeat that same situation. But being a 12-year-old, I was very compassionate. I just felt for my mom. She was so justified in the decision that she made. And even though I grew up with Christian beliefs and understood who God was and I was created in his image, my compassion allowed me to justify, like, oh, in certain circumstances, this is going to be okay. And it was later when I was a little older than 12, I had a conversation with my dad and shared with him, mom shared with me the story you guys had gone through and this challenge, and I totally understand. And I understand why she had to make that decision. And he corrected me in that moment. And I am so grateful for that conversation. It was a God ordained moment because he stopped me in my tracks of a 12-year-old who thought I had a lot of good opinions about life. And he said, that was a hard decision we made and it wasn't the right one. And even though it felt like it was what we had to do, looking back, I regret that decision. If I could do it all over, I would. And at that point, he shared with me from his perspective to my 12-year-old brain that God made life and we don't have the ability to stop life when it was created. And that value of life for him took him down a long journey of asking for forgiveness, of going. He did a similar program like Bridges of Hope that we have here. And in his time, he did a memorial for the child that they had lost. And that changed my perspective to not only having the compassion for women who are in those hard situations, but to pair that with the value for life. And to see my dad having gone through forgiveness and then hearing my mom's side of it, where not only was she saying she would never have wanted to do that again, but hearing from her how important forgiveness was and how Jesus transformed her life. She had years of shame and regret. And even she shared with me like postpartum depression after she was born because she realized at that point in time what she had lost before. And it wasn't until after having a healthy baby that she realized the gravity of it all. And she had a really hard time with that. Having grown up with a mom who had trauma, who had emotional hurts, who had depression as a result of all of that, allowed me to see firsthand there are harms of abortion. The circumstances are hard, but the consequences are hard. And having my dad help shape that so that it's not just compassion and being able to justify why it's hard and why that was necessary, but no, God can intervene in that situation, and he was the creator of that life. It was very personal. It was right here in my front yard, in my house, in my family, and that has changed me forever. From that point forward, I was passionate about life. I remember being in high school, and one of my school teachers knew I was a believer and challenged me in class once to speak up about the value of life. It was about like a bacteria and should we eradicate all bacteria? And I'm like, but God created it. There must be a purpose for it. Let's control it, but maybe not eliminate the very last bacteria, because what if there's some purpose for it that we just don't know? And I remember having to debate that in class, and it felt silly, but it was because God created life, and even that was important. And then in youth group, I got to stuff newsletters. One of the moms in our youth group brought us all together, and one of our service projects was stuffing newsletters for the local pregnancy center. So from 12 years old and on, I was stuffing newsletters and an advocate for life and debating in class about the value of life, even if it was just a bacteria. But in real life, we're talking about God's people that he's knitted together in the womb and created these precious lives. And so that's my personal story. And that was probably way too long, but that's the whole thing.
Oh, no, I love that. And, even having heard it before, thinking about how your dad handled that situation. And, as parents, sometimes we want to shy away from talking about when we blew it, right? Talking about when we messed up for fear that that's going to cause our kids to do the same. And I love that your dad just entered into that and explained, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have done that. And now, these years later, that's stuck with you. I mean, that's a formative moment.
It was formative. And if he hadn't stopped, if he had been too afraid to share his blunders or think that I would follow in his footsteps and didn't take that moment, it would have been a lost moment. And that shaped me. I might have gone forward just thinking this is justifiable and not realizing the value of life from that point forward. So I'm glad he took that moment to share it with me.
So now you take that compassion, you take that stirring within you at age 12, and you get to apply that every day with our amazing team of nurses that you lead at Life Network. Tell us about a time that you encountered a young woman who just felt like she was trapped into choosing abortion, and what was going on in her life that just made her feel that way.
Yeah, there's been several women, and their stories are all very similar. One that particularly sticks out, it was the most recent one probably, was a woman who did not have the support of her boyfriend. They had talked ahead of time before they were dating and in a relationship that they both just really didn't want kids. But when she became pregnant, the story changed a little bit, and she thought, well, maybe we could have kids. So when she shared with her partner that she was pregnant and she's going to come to our center, he said, oh, I thought you already took care of this. I thought this was already done, meaning he thought she had had an abortion. And when she came in, she was in tears about this because not only was he just there like, well, you're already done with it. This wasn't a hard decision. It's just something you do. Just get over it and take care of it. And she felt like he devalued the emotional impact it would have on her, that it could just be done like that. Like you just make an appointment, get it done, and it's over. And she realized that it was going to have a big impact. But then when we got into the room and did the ultrasound, she found out she was having twins. We suspected twins. It looked like there were two, and she had to take a break and use the restroom and come back. And in the restroom, I could hear her on the phone with her partner and raised voices. I couldn't hear the conversation, but she got off the phone with him and almost in tears said, "Yeah, he says that I can't guilt him into wanting to keep this." And she was obviously struggling with the decision. What was she able to be a single mom with two other kids and raise twins without the support of a dad? And so that's a big decision. That is heavy and that's hard. And so we see a lot of women like that where they don't have the support of family. They don't know how they're going to make it financially. They are just barely making it with the kids that they have right now or their situation where they're at. And the idea of raising a child, and most of them are not just flippant about it. They want to be able to raise a child well, and they realize that they're just not in a good place. And how can this happen? And they feel hopeless. They feel like there's nothing for them to do. And in this situation, just really, she was in tears, and at the end, she thanked us for being there to listen to her because her partner certainly wasn't. He wasn't able to hear the needs she had, the emotional stress that this was causing for her, and he wasn't able to be compassionate in that moment. So she was grateful that there were listening ears here. But that's the scenario, is whether it's a parent for a teen that's not supportive, or if it's a partner for a spouse. There's sometimes married couples where they just feel like they can't bring another child, and there's just no other option because they're just strapped, or they're in a bad situation. Sorry, I'm probably telling too many stories. But
That's good. Well, I'm curious, Barbara. So, both as a family nurse practitioner as well as the nurse manager for Life Network, when you hear people describe abortion as essential reproductive health care, what goes through your mind and what would you say to that?
when I hear the word reproductive health care, we're talking about reproductive care. And when you're terminating the results of something that was reproduced, it's just a contradiction. And then when you talk about health care, we're talking about the care of someone's physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And when you talk about abortion as being health care, when we are not dealing with the emotional well being of a woman or her spiritual well being, and we're looking only at the physical, and that's only dealing with a circumstance. It's not even talking about her physical health. And when we talk about physical health of a woman who goes through an abortion, there are so many side effects and complications that could happen that we're causing harm to a woman's body. I think it's a contradiction to call it health care at all because there is not care going on and we're causing harm not only to the woman's body but to the life that is growing inside. So it's a contradiction on so many levels that I cannot call it essential health care at all.
So, you mentioned complications and risks. Let's talk a little bit about that. Have you seen the risks of at home abortion pills firsthand in your role?
We have had several calls that I've taken where the woman calls in, not necessarily a patient that we've had, but seeking help because when they do a medical abortion and they take the abortion pills and go through the abortion process at home, it's unsupervised. They're not in a medical clinic. They may or may not have had information given to them about what to expect. Or if they did get information about what to expect afterwards, it was very minimal. So we get a lot of women after the fact having taken the abortion pill and they're calling saying, is this bleeding normal? Is this pain normal? And as a matter of fact, it's not normal. Their bleeding has gone on and on and on. They're feeling dizzy. They're feeling lightheaded. They're going to pass out. And yet they were not informed that this could happen. They did not know the level of blood loss that could happen that could lead to them feeling dizzy, low blood pressure, passing out. They don't have people with them to help them, no one to get them to the emergency room. They don't know, should I go back to the clinic where I got help from, or am I supposed to go to the emergency? Which emergency room? Does it matter where I go? They don't get all of these pieces of information shared with them and they are suffering. And we had a patient that was here recently and she was here for a pregnancy test and she said, I cannot go through an abortion. I had one several months ago. Every complication that we share with our patients that could happen had happened to her and she was traumatized from it. She did go through an abortion and it was complicated. The whole situation is unfortunate. In her situation, she had to have a second procedure because not everything cleared and she was getting an infection internally. When they cleared everything, they did damage to the inside of her uterus and part of her uterus was torn and cut in that procedure. And then she bled after that. So then she had to go in for a third procedure where they had to surgically repair the tear that they had created. So she went through every single possible complication that there was. And when she was pregnant again, she said, there is no way I can do that again. And I agree with her. That was horrible. And that is, unfortunately, some of our women will experience that. And then no one's ever shared that with them, that that could happen. And it's devastating when that does happen. It's life threatening, but it's also the emotional trauma that goes with that. It doesn't go away quickly when they realize what's happened. And then there's not only physical pain, but regret a lot of times, or shame, or those are the things that we don't necessarily get phone calls about, but when they're here after the fact, after having an abortion previously, we do hear about the after effects. I can't do that again. I can't even live with myself when I think about
Yeah.
what happened before. So lots of complications.
A lot of times I'll talk about how we experience a lot of high highs and a lot of tremendous outcomes, but then you just outlined one of those low lows, just, being with a young woman like that in the heart, in the wake of a decision where she didn't understand all of ramifications of pursuing an abortion. And so the flip side of that, talk about a recent story that really captures why Life Network's work matters.
I try to pick which story. The most recent story was just such a huge celebration for me personally. I've had the joy of taking patients that are Spanish speaking and using my limited Spanish skills, but enough to communicate some important concepts, and sharing with a woman who was very abortion determined. She came in, she had a child under a year old was not here legally, had just been kicked out of her home, and her boyfriend had been deported. And she had no way to support her child. She had a little one already. She just didn't know what she was going to do. And she was just coming in to get an ultrasound so she knew how far along she was so she could go through with the abortion process. And we talked and we had all the conversations. She let me pray with her. At the end of the conversation, she was still determined to have an abortion, not even moved to undecided. It was, nope, I'm going forward with this. And the nurses will usually try to follow up and see if there's any other resources or help we can offer after the fact. And so I did call back and couldn't reach her. We lost touch with her. I tried several times and the phone number had changed and it just wouldn't go through. And 10 weeks later, she called us back and she said, I didn't go through with my abortion, but I'm going to do it now. I just need one more ultrasound to verify how far along I am so I can go through the process. She came in. We did the ultrasound. We had all the conversations. This time, her pregnancy was much further progressed, and she could see it a lot more on the ultrasound picture when she came in, to the point where she could say, oh, wow, I can almost tell if this is a boy or a girl. Do you think this is a boy? And we are not trained to tell the sex of the baby. We cannot. So I just showed her all the pictures of what was on the screen, and she could come to her own conclusions. But she said, I promised myself I would never have an abortion if this baby was a boy. And now that she was further along and could identify that maybe this was a boy, she was starting to waver a little bit. She left with marking undecided as her intention at that point because she really wasn't sure what to do. And then I tried calling back again. That's our normal follow-up, and I wanted to make sure she had all the help she could get in between because she had a lot of other resources she needed, right? She didn't have housing. She didn't have support anymore. She needed financial help. She has a 1-year-old that needs help. So we want to make sure she had as much of those resources as well. Unfortunately, her phone wouldn't work again. We'd call and it wouldn't go through. Her boyfriend wound up calling us trying to say, hey, I have her phone number, but I have her phone, but I've been deported out of the country and she doesn't have her phone anymore. So if you get a hold of her, please let her know where I'm at in Mexico and that I have her phone. And so I'm like, great, well, we're not going to be able to get a hold of her. But she called back again just a few days ago. And she said, I am going to keep the baby. I may be deported any day now. I don't know how long I'm going to be in the United States. I don't know if I'm going to have a chance to apply for any insurance coverage or get help for prenatal care. But I'm going to keep this pregnancy, and can you help me get a physical exam so we can get another ultrasound before I have to leave the country? And so we got her set up with our IPC program, which provides wellness exams for women, and it includes blood testing that would be done at an initial prenatal care exam. So this woman is going to have a prenatal care exam, basically. It's not prenatal care, but she's going to have that initial startup to make sure she's healthy, that the pregnancy is healthy, another ultrasound, and after 20 weeks, she has decided to keep this baby. And this was a long process, and it just reminded me that God is never done, that there's hope, and where we think something might not go forward, God might have other plans. And it was a beautiful story. And I cried when I read the email from her to give her a call back because she needed some more resources. It's a big victory when God intervenes in such a drastic way from someone that was so sure she couldn't do this, and she's realized she actually can, and we get to be part of that story and offer the help she needs so she can follow through. That was amazing.
I love that. And, I think about all of the in-person care like that and just the difference that you and our awesome team of nurses can make face to face. But so many times appointments like that almost start in a pre-appointment, if you will, by phone or through a text chat. And, what difference does it make for a woman who she's searching online, she is reading information about abortion pill, and she's thinking about that, and she gets on the phone with you or one of our nurses, and she's just feeling totally overwhelmed and unsure. Talk about the difference you can make in those moments.
Yeah, I can think of a specific situation. We had a young girl. She was just 18, still in high school, still living with her parents, and she just casually chatted on our 24-hour nurse chat. So that's one of the ways they can communicate with us outside of the clinic is that 24-hour nurse availability. And so she found our website, she chatted, she just needed some information about an abortion pill. So the nurse replied back, gave her some general information, but asked some questions and let her know we were there to support her in this process, wanted to see if we could get her an appointment so she could come in person. When we have them in person and we can talk with them about options, it's ideal. We would love to see them in person and create a connection and let them know they really are supported and cared for. But sometimes that's not possible. And so this young woman was not ready to come in person, and she hadn't told anyone except her boyfriend that she was pregnant. But because the conversation continued via chat, she did say, well, I am experiencing some pain. And so she started describing what was going on, and the symptoms to the nurse sounded a lot like an ectopic pregnancy, which is when the fertilized egg doesn't travel all the way into the uterus. It gets stuck along the way. It causes a fallopian tube to burst if it continues to grow too large, if there's no medical intervention. And so the nurse recognized the symptoms, encouraged her to go to the emergency room to get checked out, get some medical attention. But the young girl was like, if I do go to the hospital, everybody's going to know I'm pregnant. I can't tell anybody that this is going on. And so we can't force people to do things, even if we're really concerned. But the nurse checked in a few hours later. No, the gal replied back, I haven't told anyone yet. I can't go yet. I still have to go to school. She had all these reasons why she couldn't get help. And so after back and forth, I thought, well, maybe I can give her a call and just talk. Maybe if she hears it in person, how concerned we are, how the weight of this situation, maybe that will help her realize this is really important. You need to get seen. So I asked permission, instead of just chatting, is it okay if we call you? And she said it was okay. And so I called, and she was really nervous about talking about the pregnancy. She was worried about what her mom was going to say. She had an unstable home situation, and sharing that she was pregnant might make everything spiral out of control. And there was just so much. She couldn't tell this aunt. She couldn't tell this friend. She couldn't get help from this person. And everything I talked about, I told her this could be life-threatening, and I'm sure your family wants you to get help more than they're going to be worried about being mad at you for pregnancy. Like, this could be life-threatening. And she just had every reason not to go. However, we ended the conversation, and she said, I will get my boyfriend to take me to the hospital when he gets off of work today. So I checked in later with a chat, said, is your boyfriend there? Are you guys going? Well, we're with the family right now, but I'll ask him to do it in a little while. And here we were back in the same situation where we'd been for the previous 2 days. But because we'd established that relationship, because there was a good connection, because she had someone who was caring and listening to her, that next day at 2 a.m., when she was in the emergency room, she texted back and said, by the way, I went to the ER. They had to do an emergency surgery for me because I had an ectopic pregnancy that burst. I lost 2 liters of blood. I had to get a blood transfusion. The nurse told me she doesn't know how I lasted this long. And for me, that was one of the most significant conversations yet we've had via chat, because it literally saved her life. If she would have just been so scared and not realized this was such an emergency, if she had not had those conversations and just didn't want to tell anybody because she was afraid of the aftermath. But she had heard it so many times. She knew that it was very important for her to go, and she got the help she needed. And I really am convinced that that was life-saving for her.
Well, Barbra, thank you and your team for the way that you come alongside everyday young women like this who are facing these, what are really their biggest decision of their young lives. And just as we wrap up, what do you see that has surprised you in your time at Life Network in cases like this where, young women are just completely overwhelmed? And is there anything that surprised you about your experience so far?
I think the biggest surprise for me is we talk about giving women resources. We want to give them support. We want for them to know that they're not alone in their decision, that when they choose to carry a pregnancy, whether it's through adoption, that they're going to provide a different life for their child, or if they're going to decide to parent, we have all these resources to put around them, support them with. We have resources for community, nutrition programs, safety programs, housing, all of these things that we can offer. And even though we have all of that, it surprises me that in our community, there still is reputation that pregnancy centers, it's just about saving the baby, that we don't care about the mom. And I think that is the most shocking to me, because there's no evidence that I see in anything that we do that this is all just about the baby. We care so much about the mom, so much about the dad. We want to support the dad. We have men's services here. We want the family unit to thrive. We want the mom to have the ability to care well for this child. We have all the services and resources available. And I feel like at the heart of what we do is caring for women, families, and a child. And I hope in the future that pregnancy centers are recognized for caring for the whole woman, the whole family, and the child. And it's not just about saving a baby, although that's important too. I didn't want to discredit that, but I think that's surprising to me that there's that myth out there. And I obviously people are not well informed about what pregnancy centers really do.
Well, that's really well said. And hopefully podcasts like this one can help people understand just the robust services that our pregnancy centers and others like us around the country offer young women and men like you've described every day. And so as we wrap up, I just want to thank you for your leadership of our nurses and our medical professionals and just the way that you serve women and men who come into our 4 clinics every day with just excellence and compassionate care. I'm grateful to serve alongside you.
I'm grateful to be here. It's a joy and such a privilege to serve the Lord in such a great capacity.
Well, if today's conversation encouraged you, would you share this episode with a friend? And don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss a story of life and hope. Thank you for listening to the LifeCast, where we celebrate life, speak up for the voiceless, and highlight important life-affirming work like the work of Barbra and her team. And I hope you'll join us next week, where my guest will be Heartbeat International President Jarrell Godsey. They've faced some tough opposition legally and legislatively for their work supporting pregnancy centers, so I know that's a conversation you're going to want to hear. For executive producer Mike Segovia and producer Serena Dillon, I'm Rich Bennett. Thank you for being with us for this episode of The LifeCast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The LifeCast. To find out more about Life Network, go to elifenetwork.com. Once you're there, you can check out the many outreaches we have available. From our men's services to our Bridges of Hope support program, you'll be sure to find a helping hand for yourself or someone else in their time of need. Also, we have many ways to get involved here at Life Network. Simply click on the Get Involved tab and see all the opportunities we have available to serve. We appreciate your prayers and support for this ministry. Find out how you can come alongside us by going to elifenetwork.com. Just search the top of the index for the green Donate tab. Thank you for listening in today. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of The LifeCast. The LifeCast is a ministry of Life Network.
At Life Network Family Thrift Store, we believe in bringing joy to life. Discover treasures that add a little joy to your everyday life, sometimes with a side of humor. Whether you're shopping for yourself, your family, or your home, our brand names and affordable finds make every day special and a lot more fun. Join our community of joy seekers and make Life Network Family Thrift Store your go-to destination for smiles and savings. Now with 2 locations, the Life Network Family Thrift Store, bringing joy to life.